Okay, so let's dive into this. We are looking at a really monumental shift in East Asian geopolitics.
We really are.
Specifically, the focus today is on this recent, very sharp escalation in tensions between Japan and China, all centered on Taiwan.
Right. And this isn't just, some diplomatic back and forth. This is something that has a direct impact on supply chains, on trade.
And on the actual fundamental capacity of major world powers to replace their military hardware.
Exactly. I mean, what we're seeing is a moment where all that diplomatic ambiguity, it's just been replaced by quantifiable hard risk.
So we're moving from just posturing to actually looking at military readiness.
And more importantly, the limitations of our industrial capacity. For you listening, the relevance is immediate. This whole situation introduces just profound risk into global maritime trade.
And the supply chain that feeds the U.S. Defense Industrial Base, the DIB.
That's the one.
The event that really kicked this all into high gear was a statement from Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi. It was surprisingly blunt.
Oh, incredibly so. She didn't mince words at all.
She publicly declared that any Chinese military action against Taiwan, and she specifically named a naval blockade or an invasion,
right,
would be a, quote, survival-threatening situation for Japan.
And that phrase, survival-threatening situation, that's the seismic shift right there.
And what does that mean? It means Japan could potentially respond militarily.
Exactly. Historically, Japan's stance on Taiwan has been, famously nuanced, very careful. It was designed to keep everyone guessing.
Both Beijing and Washington.
Both. Even influential leaders like Shinzo Abe, they voiced concern, but they never tied a Taiwan contingency so directly to an actual Japanese military response.
So Takaichi just took that whole delicate dance throughout the choreography and said, if this happens, then that happens.
Pretty much. It fundamentally broadens Japan's interpretation of when it can act to defend an ally. It just removes all the ambiguity.
Which might sound good for deterrence in Washington, but it must have dramatically increased the risk as seen from Beijing.
Oh, absolutely. And China's response was not slow. It was immediate, and it was furious.
Furious is probably an understatement. China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, called the remarks shocking.
He said Takaichi had crossed a red line that should not have been touched. They demanded a retraction immediately.
And said China must, quote, resolutely respond.
And that pushback wasn't just behind closed doors. It went straight to the UN.
Right. What happened there?
China's UN ambassador stood up and publicly said any armed intervention by Japan would be seen as an act of aggression.
Not defense.
Aggression.
Exactly. And that they would meet that aggression with their own right of self-defense under the UN Charter. So that escalates it from a disagreement to a legal justification for war.
It does. But they didn't just talk. They immediately started with non-kinetic coercion, hitting Japan where it hurts, economically.
What kind of specific countermeasures did they roll out?
The pressure was immediate and tangible. First, they requested Chinese citizens not to travel to Japan. That's a huge hit to tourism. Then, a de facto suspension of Japanese seafood imports. But the most telling one, for the global economy anyway, was reports of stalled rare earth export procedures.
Stalled rare earth exports. So that's a direct signal.
It's a signal that they're willing to leverage their control over critical materials. And we'll circle back to that because it's a massive vulnerability for everyone else.
So how did Takaichi handle this pressure?
It was revealing. She refused to retract the core remarks, sticking to the new policy, but she did backpedal a little bit.
That's so.
She later said she would avoid mentioning specific military scenarios in public. It just shows how sensitive this whole thing is, both at home and abroad.
She's trying to draw a hard line, but also manage the political fallout.
Precisely.
So the diplomatic guardrails are definitely weaker.
Yeah.
But if diplomacy is failing, we have to look at the hard military cost. What does that look like?
Yeah, this is where it gets pretty sobering. We looked at the findings from a major CSIS war game simulation. It was set in 2026, modeling a conflict between China and the U.S., Taiwan, and Japan. The results are stark.
We always hear that the U.S. and its allies have the tech edge. But what did the war game actually show was the key condition for victory?
It all comes down to Japan. Almost entirely on their immediate cooperation.
Really?
In 22 out of 24 scenarios, the U.S. and its allies won, which, sounds good. But there is a huge caveat.
Which if?
They only win if the U.S. intervenes quickly and if Japan lets the U.S. use its bases for combat operations, airfields, ports, everything.
So if Japan hesitates, the whole thing just crumbles.
Exactly. China wins if the U.S. doesn't intervene, or, and this is the critical part, if Japan stays neutral and denies access to its bases.
So those forward bases are everything.
They're the single most important factor. Without them, U.S. fighters have to fly from Guam, which is just too far away. It guts their ability to generate sorties.
Let's talk about the losses, because the scale is just, it's hard to comprehend. The simulation was only for 3 weeks of fighting.
And the losses are catastrophic. In the base scenario, the U.S. loses 2 aircraft carriers.
2?
15 large surface combatants, so your destroyers, your cruisers, and 270 fighter aircraft.
What about Japan?
Japan loses 112 aircraft and 26 naval vessels. And China gets hit hard, too, don't get me wrong. They lose 138 ships and 155 aircraft, mostly amphibious ships.
I mean, those numbers are just... it's like vaporizing decades of defense spending in a matter of weeks.
It is. But what really stood out was the replacement timelines.
How long does it take to get that stuff back?
This is where the industrial fragility is just staggering. To replace one of those aircraft carriers, 40 years.
40
years at the current surge production rate. Your big destroyers, 15 years. And to replace the F-35 fighters, you're looking at something like 5 to 8 years.
40 years. I mean, that's not a deterrent. That feels like a penalty for even engaging. You lose a carrier and it's gone for a generation.
The inventory risk is massive, but it's not just the big ticket items. It's the consumables. It's the munitions.
The things you actually fight the war with.
Right. And the war game showed a critical shortage of long-range anti-ship cruise missiles, the LRASMs.
How bad is the shortage?
The entire Indo-PACOM inventory of LRASMs, that's about 440 missiles, would be gone in 3 to 7 days.
A week.
The Allied forces just run out almost immediately, and the lead time to produce more Tomahawks or LRASMs is about 2 years. You can't just spin that up overnight.
And this industrial weakness is in stark contrast to China's manufacturing capacity, right?
It's a frightening contrast. China's defense industry is described as being on a wartime footing.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, look at shipbuilding. Their capacity is estimated to be 230 times larger than that of the United States.
230 times?
Now, they might be focused on different kinds of ships, sure, but the sheer volume they can produce means that even if the Allies win the first battle, the post-conflict reconstitution gap is it's devastating for long-term deterrence.
That's a brutal asymmetry. So if the kinetic fight is so costly, why can't we just deter it with sanctions? Why isn't that enough?
Because China has spent the better part of a decade systematically trying to sanction-proof its economy.
In what areas?
Take energy. They're importing huge amounts of crude from Russia and Iran. They're moving to yuan-denominated oil trading with places like Saudi Arabia.
So they're trying to get out from under the dollar.
And they've built strategic pipelines from Russia and Myanmar to reduce their reliance on sea lanes that the U.S. Navy could, blockade.
What about food? That's always seen as a point of leverage.
They're largely insulated there, too, at least for staples. Their domestic self-sufficiency for wheat is over 93%. For corn, it's over 90%.
So they can feed their people.
They can.
Yeah.
The big vulnerability is soybeans, which they import for livestock feed, but it's not central to human survival in the same way.
So the idea that sanctions alone would force Beijing's hand is tenuous.
It's very tenuous. But the greatest economic risk isn't about China, it's about Taiwan itself.
Right, the semiconductors.
It's the ultimate incalculable risk. Taiwan has over 60% of the global market for contract semiconductor manufacturing.
60%.
If a blockade happens, analysts say you can keep the population fed with maybe 1 ship a day. But keeping the economy running, it's almost impossible.
The entire global tech ecosystem would just collapse.
It would. It's a terrifying form of deterrence, but a very fragile one.
Okay, so let's flip the supply chain back around. We talked about China sanction-proofing itself.
Yeah.
What about the U.S. defense industrial base? Is it self-sufficient?
No, and this is a huge vulnerability. The U.S. DIB relies heavily on China for specific raw materials.
Like what?
Advanced battery components, certain ferroalloys, non-ferrous metals, things you need for high-end military hardware.
And how long would it take to find other sources?
The assessment is 5 years or more to find new suppliers, build new refineries, secure the whole supply chain.
5 years to get the materials to build the weapons we would need right now.
Exactly. And that brings us right back to Japan as the geopolitical linchpin and the next phase of this, hybrid threats.
Because, as you said, U.S. access to Japanese bases is the absolute key to military success.
It is the single critical condition. If that access is delayed or denied, the whole outcome could flip.
So China has a massive incentive to use non-military means to stop Japan from ever granting that access.
That is the domain of hybrid warfare, precisely. We have to look at the risk of China using coordinated cyber attacks, information warfare.
What would that look like?
Think sophisticated cyber attacks that target the power grids and logistics hubs for U.S. bases in Okinawa. Paralyze them before a single jet takes off.
So not just hacking a website, this is an integrated campaign.
An integrated campaign. You combine that with information warfare targeting the Japanese public, sowing fear about being dragged into an American war.
And the economic coercion, like stalling rare earth exports, that we already saw.
Exactly. The goal is political. Paralyze Japan's will to act.
And Japan is obviously aware of this. We're seeing them restructure their military.
They are. Their new defense buildup program is a big deal. They're buying standoff weapons like the Norwegian JSM missile for their F-35s.
So they can hit targets from farther away. It's about denial deterrence.
It is. They're building the policy and the capability to intervene and survive.
But again, it comes back to industrial production. Are they solving that munitions shortage problem any faster?
And that's the challenge. The really important goals, like bulking up munitions stockpiles and their submarine industrial base, those are all flagged as long-term.
So 5 years or more.
5 years or more, right up against the same timeline the U.S. is facing for its material shortfalls.
Okay, so let's synthesize this. What does it all mean for us? Japan's new posture increases the kinetic risk. Denial deterrence is key, but the immediate vulnerability is the Allied industrial base's inability to replace anything quickly.
Right. And all this is happening while China has been strategically preparing for sanctions, making them highly resilient.
The core issue seems to be a time problem.
It's a profound time problem. The 5+ years needed to fix these industrial gaps, raw materials, munitions, it means there's a ticking clock on Allied deterrence.
We're basically counting on politics and diplomacy to hold the line for the next few years.
Because the industrial base just won't be ready for a long time.
And that tension, the geopolitical volatility versus the slow grind of industrial reality, that creates a very specific kind of market risk, doesn't it?
It does. The urgent need for strategic materials, coupled with China's willingness to weaponize them, presents let's say, an opportunity for speculative analysis.
All right, for our final minute, let's go there. This is where we cross into pure speculation, so let's say it loud and clear for everyone. This is not financial advice.
So we've established two things. One, China has already shown it's willing to stall rare earth exports as a weapon.
Okay.
Two, the USDIB needs 5+ years to fix its own shortfalls in specific raw materials. This creates a huge supply risk.
And we're not just looking at all rare earths. We're zeroing in on materials China controls that are critical for defense. So what's the speculative play here?
We are targeting vanadium. It's a ferroalloy metal, and it's essential for hardening specialty steel. Think armor plates, high-strength alloys, and defense components.
And China has major strengths in vanadium production.
They do. So given that it's critical to the DIB and that it takes half a decade to find alternative sources, China has maximum leverage over this specific material right now.
So the unpredictable risk of them using that leverage,
coupled with the urgent 5-year timeline for the U.S., suggests that materials China controls will face maximum price volatility in the next 1 to 2 years.
So the trade idea is a highly speculative, long-dated, long position in vanadium futures.
It's a very risky bet on the intersection of Allied industrial weakness and Chinese coercive policy.
Highly volatile, highly dependent on a crisis. But you're buying the underlying asset that forms the basis of that geopolitical leverage.
That's the idea.
And that wraps up this deep dive. The slow pace of industrial change means our deterrence is incredibly fragile right now. We hope this has given you something serious to mull over. We'll talk to you next time.